Avenue in Metairie.
C&C Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, C&C provides patient-centered care for your entire family. C&C Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're talking basketball. That's right, the New Orleans Pelicans. We also will touch on the Zurich, which is happening as we speak. Also, the New Orleans Saints, as next week is the draft, if you can believe that already. Next Thursday, we'll be talking draft, going into, again, a weekend of draft. And, of course, the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival happening at the same time. It's a great time here in the city of New Orleans. And can I say it? A Chamber of Commerce type day here in New Orleans with a beautiful weather and a little bit of maybe rain tomorrow. And then the weekend, originally they had said the highs would be about 69. Looks like about in the mid-70s now. It's going to be a beautiful weekend for golf, beautiful weekend here in the city. So if you can, get out there and enjoy it. Today we've got two great hosts, two great guests for us to join us. Les East, CrescentCitySports.com, Saturday Down South, also an accomplished author as well, and also Oleh Kosel of the Bird Rights, who again I think is one of the best we have in the city when it comes to Pelicans basketball. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming down. Les, we'll start with you first. Let the folks know about what you're doing. Tell us about your fantastic book as well.
Oh, thanks, Eric. First of all, you should have texted me with the tie, the basketball tie. I had my fleur-de-lis. Where's my fleur-de-lis? I have my fleur-de-lis. Well, but I could have gone with the hoops theme.
He's always the best. He's always the best dressed guest on the show. Can I tell you that?
Yeah. Well, that's my wife's doing. So.
There you go.
Give her credit. Yeah, the book, thank you, is Donkeys, Elephants, and Giraffes. It is a novel about politics in the media and sports to some degree. And you can find it on all the traditional online platforms, BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, etc. Sports-wise, I am, of course, writing for CrescentCitySports.com. As you mentioned, I just did a deep dive on the Pelican season, which I guess will come in handy today. And Saturday Down South, covering LSU and Mississippi State for them. Just did a story on the LSU #1 ranked baseball team. And
for now,
although they just ran through a gauntlet, and
they did.
The schedule's a little bit easier for the next few weeks.
But losing ULL in midweek is going to hurt them.
Right.
With Ole Miss, who's kind of down this year after a national championship run last year in the weekend series.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Where every SEC team they've played to date has been like a top 12 team.
Right.
None of the teams are currently ranked, although Ole Miss is the
rest
defending national champion. So it gets a little easier, which will help them get ready for the SEC
and they need to get their middle relief together.
Well, yeah, and that's the story I did, is kind of like after Paul Skeens, the ace pitcher.
Right.
The pitching's a little bit shaky, and the defense is better than last year, but a little bit shaky.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but they have a long way to get that ironed out before they try and make a run. But I digress.
Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's
I'm trying to slip every bit of information I can in.
Well, there you go, LSU baseball. So that's about it, and we'll be talking about the draft later on. Of course, I'll be posting at CrescentCitySports.com on the Saints draft as well.
Les will have a cot at the Saints facility where he stays for 3 straight days because of the draft. Oleh Kosel is the editor-in-chief of the Bird Rights, which I believe is one of the, if not the best, one of the best sites we have when it comes to Pelicans basketball. Oleh, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for that warm welcome. Yeah, the biggest news for me is, of course, I left SB Nation. About 8-9 years I spent with them. So I had these bosses that I basically had to do everything that was told.
Right.
Now I've ventured out on my own. SB Nation had a lot of cutbacks, and not just in basketball. So this kind of pushed me in going on my own, and I think it's going to be a good decision.
I believe it will be. Again, there's something to be said to be working for yourself, to be independent. I am. Les is obviously working for stringing for multiple publications, and your publication is already, again, one of the top-notch publications. I know you'll do well, believe me. How can folks find you on the Bird Rights?
It's still all the same. We've got the same web address for the articles, the podcast, and everything, www.thebirdrights.com, or you can follow us. Personally, myself on Twitter under my full name, or the Bird Rights, same name on Twitter too.
Beautiful. Let's get started. Let's talk Pels. Tale of two seasons, as even David Griffin said, which by the way I thought was, and you guys were there. Now, he's been at times a guy that's a big word salad, right? Kind of talks around things, and you got to try to decipher. Maybe not like a Mickey Loomis, but there have been times during his tenure as the Vice President of Basketball Operations for the Pelicans where he's been just straightforward. I thought that was the most honest year-end press conference that I've seen from him or anyone out of that airline drop building. Would you guys concur?
Yeah, I think so. I felt the same way. And he came in clearly with a game plan. And I thought it was a smart game plan on a variety of topics, but generally speaking, he was going to meet the negative stuff head on, including the elephant, what I call the elephant in the training room.
Right.
The problems with getting guys back from injuries. He met the negative stuff head on, tried to provide useful context for it so people don't panic, and without using it as an excuse. So I thought he did a good job of balancing all of that, being honest, sharing the public's disappointment with the season overall, but acknowledging factors that were beyond their control, acknowledging that they need to do a better job in all areas, and not losing sight of the fact that there is a lot of youth on this team and a lot of future #1 picks that they can use to continue to ascend. So I think he really addressed all of those issues very well. I was impressed, as you are.
Yeah. Well, Ali, you see him all the time. You're around the facility, every day. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I loved all of his talking points because they all agreed with mine.
Right.
For instance, everything that Les said, but also add to it, Zion Williamson. In the past, the way he's covered the injuries, especially the team, they weren't as transparent, right? You never seemed to get a full understanding of the situation. I thought with this one you did. He flat out said, even before Zion kind of threw, gasoline on the fire by going out there in pregame of the last game, warming up, throwing down 8 to 10 dunks. Griffin told us it's a metrics thing. He hasn't been cleared to go to even the 5-on-5 yet, and he basically confirmed that again a week later. So he's never said anything to the contrary to make us think that Pelicans are maybe holding him back or they're not revealing everything. So from that standpoint, which is one of the biggest, right? Zion Williamson's a top 5 considered NBA talent. NBA perceptions of him, everybody's got them. Everybody's talking about him on main, national, local medias, everywhere, you name it. And Griffin, I thought, did a wonderful job in basically explaining it. He even said that when Zion mentioned the word physically, basically that sentence, physically I'm fine, he shouldn't have said that because honestly that's not true.
Right.
So like I said, he has said everything correctly, and then also to Les's point about the future of this team, he didn't dodge the fact that there were disappointments, but he also didn't deny that this team's heading in the right direction. And there's a lot of good factors that I'm sure we'll get into about that.
For sure. I will say transparency is key here because I felt like they strung us along with Zion. You kept waiting for him to come back. It was, we'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll reevaluate. And they weren't really honest and forthcoming with it. Look, that's an issue on Airline Drive, in my opinion. Since Peyton won the Super Bowl, I think they've been less transparent with the local media, and I think that spilled over into the Pelicans. I think you look at both franchises now that are not championship medal, and you say to yourself, now's kind of the time you should be transparent with the fan base and the media, because again, you're trying to be able to get good information out about your team rather than allow social media to take on and create a narrative.
Yeah, I agree, and I think last Friday was a good first step in that direction, and I think you hit on a big part of the problem is when you're not being clear or upfront about what's going on, you create a vacuum that will be filled by social media and people's imaginations. So when they say, well, wait, we thought Zion was going to be back at this point, he's not back yet, it must mean A, B, or C, because the Pelicans haven't told us what it means.
Right.
So I think they have to do a better job. Now, they're also in a difficult spot, and I think it was worse. God, there have been so many of them. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago when they came out on the eve of the season opener and said he was not going to be available because of one of his foot injuries, and it would be, I think they said 6 to 8 weeks before he'd be ready, something like that, 4 to 6 maybe. He didn't play till, this might have been his rookie year. He didn't play until January or February. They kept moving the goalpost, and even when TNT reported that it was going to be a lot longer than they said, they vehemently denied that. So I think they've gotten better at it than where they were earlier in Zion's career. But the hard part that I alluded to is that, you know, he's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks. Well, you can't say he's going to be back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks because you have to see the reevaluation before you know it. But when you say we'll update you after the reevaluation in 2 weeks, a lot of people think, oh, he might be playing 2 weeks from today. Well, no, that's not the case. The case is hopefully in 2 weeks we can say he'll be ready in a week or so. It's just an update. It's not a being cleared to play proposition. So it's hard to try and keep it vague where it needs to be vague without frustrating people by not being more specific. And if you try and be specific and you don't hit that benchmark, then it's even worse. So it's a difficult situation, and I think they've gotten a better handle on it recently in trying to be as forthright as they can be.
Oleh?
Yeah, I felt like the Pelicans almost had to be vague in this circumstance.
Why is that?
When Zion first hurt his hamstring, we had a good initial time frame on when he would be back. There was none of this reevaluation talk waiting 2 weeks. He was ramping up. He was right about at the 6-week mark, of which is normal return time for an injury of his, which was roughly about a grade 2, we think. So he had that setback, right? And so, of course, you knew they were going to treat him with kid gloves moving after that. And of course, the biggest elephant in the room was the fact that Zion's conditioning really got worse as this injury, you know, the rehab took longer and longer. You could almost see Zion putting on more weight, just not moving as well. Because when he was almost returning from that initial injury, he looked good, honestly, in pregame warm-ups. And then this last time, just what was it, a couple weeks ago, he didn't look anywhere close to it. So I feel like the Pelicans were forced to give that, you know, we're going to reevaluate him in 2 weeks, because the ball was honestly in his court. If he could get himself in quicker shape and better shape, then guess what? I think he might have made an appearance towards the end of the season. I think that hope was not wrong. That was genuine talk by the Pelicans.
Let's talk about that, because I want to go there. We'll circle back to season overview and everything else. It is the responsibility of Zion to keep his weight down. It's also the responsibility of his inner circle to be able to make sure he's keeping his weight down. But it's also, again, the responsibility of the Pelicans as well. They see him every single day. And whether they're weighing him in, whether you're seeing it visually, he gets out of shape very quickly. What is he doing? He's got a personal chef. He's got a personal trainer. He's got that facility right there, whatever he needs. If he doesn't need it, if it's not that facility, they're going to find it for him. Whether he's swimming, whether he's in the pool trying to get himself together, whether he's in the weight room just you know, crunching weights every single day to try to burn calories, based on what his calorie intake is every single day. It has happened every single year he has gotten injured, where again he has had a delay to come back or has not come back at all because he's fallen out of shape. At some point, the Zion, the inner circle, and also the Pelicans have to come together with a game plan to when he does get injured, which again has been every single year, that he again does not fall out of shape so quickly.
I agree, and I think one of the more interesting things that David Griffin said the other day, he talked for almost 40 minutes, I think. So there was a lot there to unpack. But one of the things that stood out to me is when he talked about, and I asked him specifically about numerous instances of guys not coming back on schedule or aggravating their injuries while they're rehabbing. And he acknowledged that that's happened, but he also said a little bit later, he said that we have to do a better job at everything, but in terms of getting these guys back on the court in a quicker and yet still safe manner, we have to do a better job. And that falls on, he said, off the court as well as on the court. So he didn't absolve the players from their responsibility in doing that. In Zion's case, you know, we keep hearing about friction between the inner circle and the front office and all that, and I think there's some truth to that, but they should never, ever be at cross purposes. Zion wants to be the best individual player he can be. His family, his camp want him to be the best player he can ever be. If he achieves that, the Pelicans are going to achieve their goals. Because the problem isn't that he's a selfish player, because he's not. He's an elite player, and he's a unique player. So if he's healthy and available, he's going to get everything he wants. The Pelicans are going to get everything he wants. And why there isn't apparently more unity and moving forward as a collective toward that goal, I don't quite understand, because they all have the same goal in mind and they all have the same path to reaching them.
Your take, piggyback on your own personal take on this.
Right. I feel like that is definitely an issue with, I believe, the front office and, of course, his personal inner group. We've been hearing the rumors going far back as when he almost initially came back on board, right, when he was drafted as a rookie, 2019, and that's a problem. I thought that we had moved past that. The front office had moved past that a summer ago, and unfortunately that has proven in recent months not to be the case. I don't know what the solution is, Eric. I don't know how you can find common ground if if both parties are still sitting on opposite sides looking at this differently. Because I agree with Les. There should be a commonality in what you want to achieve. It's pretty given. Right. Zion wants to be the best player. His mom and stepdad, that's all they want to see. So why they fight in certain things? For instance, the latest battle appears to be about this clause in his upcoming contract. It's going to start in July. Which they signed, where he has to conform and basically get himself weighed. I don't know what the stipulations are there.
Somebody says it's like 10 times a year or so.
Right. And he's basically got to get under 295. Apparently now his stepdad has an issue with that. It doesn't make any sense why you're throwing that out there. It just doesn't make any sense. So I feel like what I told you, what I've told you on your radio show, I feel like the front office, especially this year, has done a lot of good things to where they've tried to appease them at every corner. They're really trying to make everything work. And the reason you know this is because there's conformity between what's coming out of David Griffin's mouth and all the players. For instance, on what everybody needs to do to get better, make sure everybody's available next summer. We didn't have that a year ago. So I feel like everything's moving in the right direction. So there's still a hiccup in Zion's inner group. And that seems to be the problem that I feel like only one person can solve, and that's Zion himself.
I agree. But at the same time, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, just add something real quickly, and I agree with all of that. But it's also worth remembering that David Griffin talks about the noise surrounding Zion, which is practically unique in the NBA right now. And the thing is, when he was healthy and playing early in the year well enough in a limited number of games to be voted a starter in the All-Star game.
29 games, and it was a starter in the All-Star game.
And they were 18-8 and then 23-13. They beat Phoenix here twice in 3 days. Were atop the Western Conference right before Christmas. All of that was happening. We didn't hear a peep. No. Because everything was fine. Because he was healthy and he was playing. So if he's healthy and playing, everything else goes away.
Agreed.
But the problem is that gap from when he gets hurt until he returns to play. And that's the problem, and it's a complex problem, and I think it's a problem that has a lot of people with fingerprints.
Yeah, look, everybody's frustrated, and rightfully so. Zion's played, 35% of his potential games in the NBA through 4 seasons. So, of course, the Pelicans are going to be upset by that. Of course, his family's going to be upset because they don't want him having this kind of moniker attached to him of being injury-prone. That's why the front office has always kind of tried to brush aside certain talk about him. And they'll probably continue to do so, You're going to appease one of the top 5 players, but it just all comes down to availability. So, frustrations, they're not going to go away until this problem gets solved.
But these are self-inflicted wounds, gentlemen,
Yeah.
okay? At the end of the day, he's 22. When he gets injured, there has to be an emphasis on, okay, we've gone down this path for 4 straight years. You've got to stay in shape during this injury. And if it's, a lot of it's been lower body injuries, hard to do that. There are ways, okay? Even if, again, when we heard personal chef, everybody went, yeah, okay. When we heard, again, personal trainer, okay. But, again, you've got to be able, for your team, for the fan base, for the front office, for your inner circle, for your platform, you've got to stay in shape. You can't fall out of shape. Some guys fall out of shape. They got to figure out a way that, again, and look, they're seeing it. You see him every day. They can see when he's blowing up. They got to do something to be able to curtail that.
Well, that's true, but there's also only so much they can do. Ultimately,
Well, that's where it comes to the inner circle, right? I mean, that's where mom, dad, stepdad, all those people that are whispering in his ear how great he is. When he goes to get that second pizza, they're saying no. Okay, go get a salad.
And here's one of Griffin's most telling quotes from Friday that I don't think got as much attention as maybe it should have. C.J. McCollum only missed, he had like 7 different maladies in his 6 or 7 games, including a terrible thumb injury and a shoulder injury on his shooting arm. Both of those. He kept playing. Larry Nance came back early from a bad sprained ankle. Played a few minutes and said after the game, I'm going to give if I can get on the court, I'm going to give my team what I can give them, even though if it's not 100%.
Valanciunas, same thing, right?
Valanciunas
played 79 games.
Yeah, he played 79 games, and he was hobbled the whole year. So you got those 3 guys, and Griffin said on Friday, he said that, and I'm sure he would include Valanciunas in this, but he mentioned CJ and Larry. He said, CJ and Larry wanted to send a message that this is how you do it. Okay, you have 3 veteran leaders there showing the young players, not just Zion, but especially Zion, this is a professional NBA player. This is how you handle your business. This is why you're going to make a gazillion dollars and be, as Griffin said, people in Paris know who Zion Williamson is. Okay, you get all that fame and money and enjoyment out of playing. You get all of that by performing as a professional basketball player is supposed to perform. And I thought it was interesting that he said those 2 guys were trying to send that message. And obviously the message was not received as efficiently as it could have been. Perhaps that will be better going forward.
Not just to Zion, but that was a message I thought he was saying to all the young players on the roster. And I think I'd like you to pick this up with your comments as well. C.J. McCollum seemed very frustrated on on the night when they lost in the play-in tournament on what he had to do and how he was trying to, again, teach and give his knowledge to these young players on how you become a professional, and it wasn't sticking.
No. And go back to CJ's history. This is the first time he's ever missed the playoffs.
That's great.
He did not sign up for this. He didn't expect for Zion to be available for 29 games, Brandon 44. And I'm glad you mentioned other players, because I think Brandon Ingram deserves a lot of, let's face it, we've got to take a good look at him.
Oh, no, we're going to take a look at him in a minute.
He missed, 29, 30 games just to that toe injury, where a lot of people believe maybe he could have come back quicker. The thing with a lot of young players nowadays, Eric, we talk about it constantly on the show, they're not going to come back until they feel ready. So that means 100, 110%. Because look,
how do we
it's
get
either
there?
Stats matter to them, their inner circle, what they hear from them. It could be a various amount of things, but it's definitely different. In the past, if players miss games, they would come back as soon as they felt 75% healthy, 80%. And one thing I want to say about Zion, it is very unfortunate that he suffered that re-injury, that he had that setback. Because from everything I heard, he was working hard behind the scenes, eating right, and like I said, he looked more explosive to me in warm-ups. I was hearing better things. I think that setback put him in a bad place mentally. So for me, if I'm the Pelicans, if I'm his inner circle, I realize that I know what Zion went through last year, He was in a dark place. He even said himself, I think he slipped back into that, whether they want to admit it or not. So psychologically, I think that's where you can probably make the most improvements with Zion, That's where you can make the most ground, and hopefully that'll lead to better physical, right, characteristics, and he'll be more available that route.
Is he willing to see a sports psychologist? I mean, that's another thing. I mean, again,
The Pelicans have somebody on their staff.
Right.
I'd be curious to know how much he talks. I believe it's
Right.
Dr. Jenna Rose.
Okay.
I know that they've used her since before the bubble. So.
Right.
Now, one other thing quickly
Sure.
about CJ's post-game comments after OKC. He was very. He didn't want to mention any players
No, he didn't.
specifically, but he did say, I just focus on the things you have to do to get yourself ready to play.
Right.
And he said, eating properly,
Right.
getting the sleep
Right.
you need, all of that.
Talking about drinking water.
Right.
Right.
Hydrate.
Right.
So his point was, he didn't say it this way, but his point was, there's more to being an NBA star than doing windmill dunks in pregame warm-ups.
Agreed.
Okay, when you're off by yourself,
Right.
you have to eat properly, you have to hydrate, you have to get the proper amount of sleep. And so I thought he was trying to, instill that message, like, that there's a lot of details that goes into this
Right.
job that maybe you have to learn, and some people maybe are behind schedule in learning that.
You guys see him more than I do. Is he immature? Does he need to grow up at 22?
Well, he's 22.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure on him. at
I was
22.
pretty immature at 22.
Oh, come on, 22.
and I'm
We
still
don't want to
immature.
talk about me at 22, do we?
Right.
Come on.
So, I guess that my answer would be yes, he's immature at 22. He'll be 23 in July, but I'm not sure that he's unusually immature for someone at that
Exactly.
age. And real quick, just someone who has the lifestyle that he has, being under the spotlight 24/7, 365, social media and all of that.
Well, the social media is different. But, I mean, again, Jordan did it. Kobe did it. If you want to talk about social media, LeBron has done it. When you've got that crown on your head, you've got to live up to those expectations.
You do, but realize other players in the league that are great, they don't have to do what Zion has to do. And what I mean by that is Luka Doncic, he comes in every season out of shape. He always plays himself into shape. Nikola Jokic used to do this for years in
Yes, he
Denver
did.
until just recently. So Zion, unfortunately, has to do more, right? Because he is such an athletic specimen, so explosive. He has to be in prime shape for every single minute he's on the court. And he hasn't taken on that responsibility yet. And I like what Larry Nance said to us in his exit interview. He never threw anybody under the bus, but what he basically said was, I want Zion to have more people in his inner circle. He basically inferred that by saying, Teresa Witherspoon has been great for Zion.
Right.
We all know that.
Yes,
we heard
right.
what she did for him a season
Absolutely.
ago. But he needs more people like that in his ear. And I think that's a direct message, right, to his inner circle and for Zion, right? That maturity factor. You got to grow up. If the inner circle, your family, whoever, is not giving you the right information, you've got to kind of push them aside and get people that will do that for
Right.
you.
You don't need yes men. You don't need somebody
That's
coddling.
the last thing you need.
Right, and that's been. I think that the team has coddled him a little bit too much. We saw that with Anthony Davis when he first came to New Orleans. Eventually, again, they took the kid gloves off. They haven't done that with Zion. I'm not in his inner circle, but based on what we've seen, I think his inner circle is coddling him as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's true, and I think the Pelicans may have been guilty early on of coddling him a little too much. I understand why they did it, because as Griffin has said, he's a population of one.
Right.
When you take into account the torque that he generates and the combination of quickness and physicality and weight, that you have to be careful. There are going to be injuries that are going to happen because the human body is not designed to handle that kind of force. In a basketball game to the degree that he does it as the specimen that he is. And but I think, over time, maybe they've started to coddle him maybe a little bit less, but I think that's initially I understood it, and I think maybe now they need to take a slightly different approach.
I think they walked on eggshells until the contract was signed. Okay, I think
And you almost have to, right? With today's stars, you absolutely have to. Otherwise, the threat of them leaving. I mean, look what now Dallas Mavericks face with Luka, right? He's putting on a little bit of pressure. He said how he wasn't happy coming down the stretch of the season for Dallas. And he could legitimately walk away, right? He could force a hand, get traded. Every great player has that power. But to what Les was saying, I want to say that Zion, I feel like his inner circle has always tried to control the narrative. I've never heard anything different. And it usually comes out in the off seasons where, especially his stepfather, comes out on some show, agrees to do something, and he says things that are contrary to whatever at the time is being said by whether it's the New Orleans fan base, front office, you name it. That has to stop. I feel like that absolutely has to stop.
Right. How do you control that? I mean, again, that's tough. You know, I mean, again, he's 22. He's probably still living with his family, right? I mean, again, so.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
So that's the way that goes. All right, we're going to take a break here. I want to come back. I want to talk about Zion's contract for a moment because that's huge. Then we're going to get into Brandon Ingram. We'll talk about the season as a whole. We'll talk about the injury situation, which I've been pounding on this program and my radio show for a long, long time. A lot of these guys have been asking the questions directly to Dave Griffin and the organization. We'll talk about that as well. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Oleh, Kosel, the bird rights, and also lessees at CrescentCitySports.com are our guests. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We'll be right back.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. We're talking Pelican basketball today. We'll also touch on the draft before we get out of here, which is next week. Oleh, Kosel, the bird rights, and Les Eats at CrescentCitySports.com are our guests. You wanted to mention something about Zion before we move on.
Right. One thing about Zion, I hope that fans, anybody listening to this show, realizes that what we said about Zion is not all meant to be negative. For instance, as I said to you guys off air, there's a lot of players who are just as talented as he who don't bring the same amount of passion for the game, don't bring the same amount of camaraderie to the locker room. I mean, I look at what Trae Young is doing. He has cycled through several coaches, and I hear how he's not beloved in that locker room. Never has, probably never will be. So Zion is nothing like that. I just want fans to understand he's just a guy that is having difficulties with his body and understanding on how to deal with those issues, right? So all the responsibilities of being a professional, he hasn't checked off all those boxes, but there's a lot of them that he has.
And just to add to that quickly, is I think it would be helpful to Pelicans fans between now and the start of training camp in September, just tune out anything you see on social media or on national chat shows, that the shows where the two guys get on there and yell at each other. Ignore that. It's nonsense. Okay. There's a void that has to be filled. They want to fill it with conflict. So they're gonna blow everything out of proportion. Okay. The Pelicans and Zion Williamson are both frustrated that Zion has not played more. They're both working to try and change that for next season. Let's see what happens next season, and don't listen to any of this nonsense. That's going to be going on for months.
It will be. There's no doubt. Let's talk about the contract, because then again, you mentioned his inner circle maybe not happy with the weight clauses. There are protections for the Pelicans, rightly so. And look, they signed this thing knowing full well what the parameters were. There are in the first two seasons protections for the Pelicans in terms of weight. There's also games played clauses within that contract as well. There is a get out of jail card on that contract after 2 years if it's not working working out, they can get out of that contract, which again is almost impossible when you talk about in the NBA, right? Okay, and then the last 3 to 5, if I'm not mistaken, and Zion, you might want to correct me here, it more leans in the favor of Zion, right? With less protections, weight clauses, etc. Take it from there.
Right, so I think it's a very fair contract for both sides, right? Both parties here. Zion gets max deal, $194 million over the next 5 years. The Pelicans got a little bit back by controlling his 5th year. Usually players will fight for having that option. They've got the option. So essentially, they're going to have him, like I said, under control for the next 5 years,
in the
starting in July on this next deal.
Right.
The biggest thing, as you allude to, is that weight contract, or that weight clause. I wouldn't read that much into it, because for the Pelicans to invoke it, if they wanted to waive him, say he doesn't meet certain criteria, well, that means you have to waive that contract, and that means he suddenly becomes a free agent. I don't know in what world you're going to let a top 5 talent walk out the door unless he suffers maybe a career-threatening injury. That's the only scenario I see. But for the Pelicans' benefit, what I think is a bigger deal from that clause is the fact that they are allowed to, by the legal written word, to weigh him. So they're allowed to stay on top of his metrics. I think that's why his stepdad has been irritated by that point, because suddenly they have this certain control over him moving forward that they agreed to, and now he doesn't like it.
Is that money coming off the contract?
No, the only way the money can come off is I have to check the written word, but the only way that he's going to lose any kind of money off of them is if they honestly basically void the contract. Right. So he's going to get paid full amount, but it'll be up to Pelicans' discretion if he doesn't meet the games quota or the weight clause quota. But if that happens, then like I said, then I think the whole thing has to be voided.
So maybe it's fine.
So you don't want to go down
maybe
that
it's
route.
Fine.
Yeah, it's not very penal.
Right. There you go.
Well, why do you have to write into contracts that a professional athlete has to be in shape? Well,
I get it.
In today's world, you have to.
I asked Larry Nance the other day about the changes in players' commitment to availability compared to when he came into the league. He said, yeah, when I came into the league in 2009, guys wanted to play 82 games. It was like a badge of honor.
Right.
They wanted to earn their paycheck.
Yes.
They wanted to compete for 82 games. Now it's like, I'll get back to you when I'm ready, which might lead to our next topic.
Load management is an issue. It's an issue for the league. It's an issue all across the board. Let's talk about Brandon Ingram now. Because Brandon Ingram, I don't want to let Brandon Ingram slip out this conversation, because everything we heard was it was a toe injury. He was supposed to come back in a few weeks. It ended up stretching for 2 months. When the organization leaks that he doesn't want to come back unless he's 100%, that's telling you all you need to know. So take it first, Ollie. You've got 2 stars now. Yeah. One played 29 games, the other one played 45. And when you look at the history of those players, you pretty much are guaranteed they're not playing 60 each.
It's a problem that Brandon Ingram's trending downwards in games played in his career. And as you alluded to, a toe injury cost him 2 months.
Right.
We all expected him to miss probably in the neighborhood of 4 weeks. And then, of course, when Zion went down, you really expected for Brandon Ingram to come back early in January, and that wasn't the case. So it's not uncommon. I'm going to say it yet again. Young players really do control on when they even step back onto the court following an injury. Or it can be a load management thing because their team doesn't want them playing, say, back-to-backs or putting on too many miles, or you name it, honestly. Like I'm thinking of Kawhi Leonard. But there's others as well. So for Brandon, it's unfortunate that he seems to be trending in that direction. I know that he loves the game of basketball. I've seen fewer athletes that take his craft more seriously. The amount of work he puts in the off seasons. Plus, during the season, he watches more footage than probably 5 guys I can count in my hand. And one of them is Chris Paul. So he's doing everything you need to from that standpoint. But it's the playing through any kind of malady, any kind of something that's inhibiting him. If he's not feeling right, say his shot's not feeling 100%, he's not going to maybe play in that game when he's coming back from injury. That has to change, and I feel like C.J. McCollum made his thoughts well known on the subject, as well as others, and I'm hoping that message got heard, because I'll tell you what, Brandon didn't do himself any favors until maybe the final 4 weeks of the season. I felt like he took a step back from everything he accomplished last year, and he's in the middle of his full season, or excuse me, his max contract with the Pelicans. So his new deal that he's got to start thinking about is coming up soon, right? Whether he wants to sign an extension, what he wants to do, but he didn't play like a max player, even though he was not available, but when he was on the court until the last 4 weeks of the season. And that's got to change too.
Yep. Add anything?
Well, the only thing is, piggybacking on that, is he's a hard one to figure out, in that he missed way more games than anybody expected, and I think it's common knowledge that he's going to come back when he feels like playing, and that he wants it to be basically at 100% before he comes back. And when he first came back the last time, he didn't play all that well, and then it was, I think, the Charlotte game during that early in that surge that got him into the play, and he had his first triple-double of his career. He had another triple-double later in the season. For those last dozen or so games, he played like he did down the stretch last year, maybe even better. I mean, he was all NBA caliber down the stretch. But where was that from October until mid-March? And that's the frustrating thing with him. And then the other thing that I think you have to take into account is, I think Zion's going to look at Brandon, who's 3 years older, has been in the league longer, and say, well, look at the way he handles himself. That's the way I'm going to handle
Instead
myself.
of looking at CJ.
Yeah, exactly. He should be, just move your sights over a little bit and look at CJ or Jonas or Larry. But I think that's potentially an influence on Zion that's not terribly helpful.
Great. Guys, 66% of the cap is tied up in Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and C.J. McCollum. Now, they are lucky that they've done really well in the draft, where they bring in a guy like Herb Jones, where they bring in a guy like Trey Murphy, where they're able to find a Najee Marshall, an Alvarado, players that are right now on very, very inexpensive contracts. That will change in the next few years. They're going to be right up against the luxury tax this year, okay? They're about $1 million or so under, if I'm not mistaken. If there's going to be some changes on this roster going forward, is it going to be on the fringes of the roster, or are they going to make a move with a C.J. McCollum or a Valanciunas or a Nance? Three of their leaders, right? But three guys that have contracts that maybe could be moved.
The only position I could see a major move made is at the center position. Jonas Valanciunas, I feel, provides a certain skill set. And here in New Orleans, it hasn't been utilized enough, especially this past season. First year, when Zion was missing, I thought they went to Jonas in the block plenty. They were carried by him, those 20 and 10s. I thought, as I've said on your show, Eric, first half MVP for me a season ago. This year, he was so underutilized, especially when Zion missed time, to where it left you scratching your head. Team is struggling with offense. They went through a 10 and 25 stretch because they couldn't score the basketball. Jonas has proven he is a high-efficiency guy. He knows how to play the game. They just didn't go to him enough. And to me, that's a coaching problem, even if you're telling your players to. So from that standpoint, I could see the Pelicans move on from him. He's got one more year left on his deal. It's a very movable contract. I think is what he's making, $14 million a year. And when you look at today's basketball style, the way they play up and down, and I see what Monty Williams does in Phoenix, and I think Willie Green honestly gets a lot of, basically his strategies from Monty. I think it would behoove him to find somebody else. And by him, I mean David Griffin. So whether you chase maybe a Nick Claxton, somebody that's more mobile.
You're looking for athletic bigs.
Yeah, you're looking for somebody that can basically set the screens, pick and roll, and be more versatile defensively. The Pelicans, it was no mistake. They were one of the worst teams at defending the rim. They were fortunate they kept people out of the lane more than most, but once the opponent got in there, they had an easy time scoring because there's just no shot blocking presence, and that starts with your starting center, Jonas.
What are your thoughts? I mean, those are the leaders of this team, okay? But those are also players that, again, if you were to put them on the market, you could get something for them.
Yeah. I think if you look at the big name players, the big money players, more to the point, and who could be moved, I agree Jonas would be the first place you would look. Griffin said he expects the roster will be tweaked rather than any big moves.
Right.
But I still think Jonas would be the one you look at. Now, I do think during that surge that got him into the play-in, they did drop the ball into him more than they had done during the season, and it helped them a lot, especially get off to good starts.
He's a double machine.
Yeah, and so he did a lot of good down there, and I think we all love his effort and what he brings to the team.
Tough.
And would hate to see him go.
I agree.
But I think if they feel like they need to make a move to save some money, that's where they would look, because that's where they wouldn't be making just a financial move. They could make a financial move that might also help them basketball-wise. And like you said, you know, a more athletic center. You know, I think they could switch all 5 positions more often defensively. They could do a lot of different things that I think kind of fit with Willie Green's preference for playing. So I think that's where they would look, but they would be smart, and they know this, that you don't move Jonas Valanciunas just to move Jonas Valanciunas and save some money.
Right.
You have to be feeling like you're upgrading your roster in addition to managing your payroll, because he's too valuable to not do that.
And wants to be here.
And wants to be here. Good leader. He's got everything.
That's a guy, that's a position where in the lottery, you maybe can get an athletic big. Okay, and maybe you can hold on to him. We'll talk. Hayes has a qualifying offer. I think he's done. Hernan Gomez is a team option. He's so inexpensive. We'll see how that plays out. Richardson is a free agent. Temple has a team option. I got to believe they're going to probably move off of him. His contract is fully guaranteed if he's not waived by, again, June the 30th.
Yes.
Marshall has a team option. Alvarado a team option. Lewis is under contract. Herb Jones has a team option. Do you allow those players with team options to, again, just pick up the team option, go for another year like that? Or for Herb Jones, do you give him 4 years, $71 million?
Great question. I think the Pelicans should pursue a contract extension with him. Reason being, I think he's going to improve next year. I think what I saw out of him from, say, start of March moving forward, I saw a player that's going to be able to contribute on both sides of the ball. If you can do that in this league, you're going to get paid. Now, if you go by his whole body of work, then you might get a kind of a discount. So, yeah, if I'm the Pelicans, I avoid that scenario where he may be, I could easily see him fetch at the end of next season somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 years, maybe $80 million.
Wow. Okay.
If you get him this summer, maybe you can get him, say, 4 years, 3 years at, say, 12 to 15 million per.
Okay.
That'd be that'd be extensive savings. But other than him, I expect Jose Alvarado. He's going to be back. Josh Richardson, free agent, done. Restricted free agency on Jackson Hayes. He's just disappointed every season. He was the one that's supposed to give you what, we're harking on Jonas and Billy to do for you, but Jackson's
I keep hearing immature with him as well. I keep hearing, again, not focused on basketball, immaturity, off the field issues, which we know about, late for planes, stuff like that. I hear a lot of chatter about him that he's just not growing up.
Yeah, he's a great kid. Everything I've learned about him screams, and just like everybody in that Pelicans locker room, I want to say one thing that David Griffin has nailed in terms of getting kind of the right people inside of this building, unlike Dell Demps. So Jackson, while he's great off the court, on the court, out of every Pelican that steps in there, I think he's lacking passion more than anybody about the game of basketball.
If you're going to play a point forward position, right, with Zion and Brandon Ingram, and you got to figure that out, right? Is there a place for Kyra Lewis?
Well, I think ultimately they're going to have to choose between Kyra Lewis and Jose Alvarado because they're both young players. They're not exactly the same player, but they are a similar type of players. Both young players, both give you a true point guard as a backup, but they're kind of down the depth chart a little bit. They're not major pieces, and so the second one is not going to do you a whole lot of good. So that's someone you can move. I think you make a choice between those two. I think, personally, I would choose Alvarado because I think he's a bigger contributor right now. But I think Kyra potentially has a higher ceiling. Much higher ceiling. There's few players that are faster than Kyra Lewis. And we see what the Sacramento Kings right now are doing because, one big reason, because of De'Aaron Fox.
He's one of the fastest players, and he can break down a defense. It's what he's carving up the Warriors right now. You can imagine Kyra doing something similar because he possesses that speed, that handle, and now I think he's stronger. I thought we started seeing glimpses of real positive play out of him before the end of the season. So I'm with Les that there's a ceiling, but I wouldn't be opposed to bringing both of the players back.
Right.
You know what you're getting with Jose, but Kyra's that potential upside that, look, you used a big first-round pick on him. He might be able to provide you that 20-25 minutes of, look at Emmanuel quickly with the Knicks coming off the bench. Kyra might be able to do that for this team moving forward.
All right, guys, let's talk about injury, because that's been the issue with this team. This team is not injured. This team is one of the top teams in the Western Conference. Aaron Nelson came in with a reputation of extending the careers of Shaq and also Grant Hill. When he came in, we all threw bouquets at him. Okay? He's been overcautious with injuries at times. Maybe what was working with these older players is not working with the younger players. Again, are they thinking outside the box in terms of training, injury prevention, recovery? And this doesn't just go for the Pelicans, this goes for the Saints. It's something I've been talking about on the radio show and the TV show for a while now. They have to start take a look philosophically, whatever it is, on what they're doing, because they're losing players with soft tissue injuries for extended period of time. I'm not talking about the collision injuries in the NFL. I'm talking about soft tissue injuries that, again, they keep players out for an extended period of time. They have to take a hard look as an organization, out on nail and drop both, on what they're doing and what they're not doing, and maybe looking at some other things that are happening around leagues around the world, around the country, to maybe change things up, because that has held. The Saints lost another championship because of injuries, and this team has not moved forward because of injuries.
Well, that's a tough one, because they have taken a close look at this in recent years, and that's why they brought Aaron Nelson in. That's why the Saints made a change in their medical staff recently. And so they have evaluated it. They have gone out and gotten people with excellent reputations and brought them in, and as near as we can tell, they've given them the resources to do what they need to do. And yet we're looking at 2, 3, 4 years in which both organizations have had an inordinate number of injuries, and more importantly, an inordinate length of time for return from injury. So there's a lot of smoke there that leads you to believe there must be some sort of fire there, and yet I can't say that definitively, because these people have good reputations, and I'm not a medical expert, but I guess to the bottom line, yes, they need to do a very, very thorough evaluation of everything they're doing medically and looking around the league and the world, as you alluded to see what they can do better, because it's not good enough. And David Griffin admitted as much last week.
You know what stands out to me? It's not just really a Pelicans problem. There are injuries with almost every other team in the league. Miami Heat, Orlando Magic, they even miss more than the Pelicans. The ones that do figure it out, they achieve far more than is expected of them. The Kings, the Knicks, best examples this year. But going back to my original point, the NBA has an issue. And what I think it is this combined with load management and not pushing players like you were even doing 5-10 years ago is the issue. And you have to look no further than what Stan Van Gundy received just a couple of years ago, right? He had Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram out there for the majority of their games. Why? Because he pushed them in practice. I think, and I give a lot of credence to this theory. When you talk to a lot of players that used to play in the league, like Antonio Daniels, they all echo this. They basically believe for you to survive an 82-game schedule, you've got to put your body through the rigors to survive it. And by babying it through the course of a season, you're not going to make it.
I agree, Ali. Stan Van Gundy said it on the Pelicans broadcast. You guys are at the game, I'm listening to it, and I'm screaming, yes, Stan, yes. Because what he's saying is load management, not practicing like NBA teams used to practice, not getting on the floor is hurting the league, because you're ending up with these injuries because your body's not hardened for an 82-game season.
There's no two-a-days. There's no pushing yourself in practice for an hour in between games. They all used to happen.
Same thing with the NFL. I mean, the CBA has put it to the point where it's touch football in the off season instead of hardening your body. All right, we got 3 minutes left. We're not going to get to the draft. I want to finish up with the draft for the Pelicans. They have 9 first-round picks, okay? They have 9 second-round picks. They have a plethora of ammunition to rebuild this team, to do what they need to do with this team, to be able to get this team to a championship. How do they utilize those?
I am not using this draft pick if I'm the Pelicans, unless you move up to fortune of lottery to number 1 to get Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson at number 2. You trade that along with whether it's a Jonas Valanciunas. Maybe you keep Garrett Temple's contract because you need his salary, right? Okay. Something along those lines to where you improve either at the center position or you add more shooting. Without a doubt, that's the thing you need to improve, I think, on this team. Your center play, 3-point shooting.
Right.
Well, I agree with that completely. And bringing in another 19 or 20-year-old isn't really going to make a difference in the next year or two. Right. So if there's something they can do to bring in a veteran who can help strengthen those areas, I totally agree with that. But for the most part, I would say, to get to your question, is to be patient. Okay? We got a glimpse of what this group can be this year, and it was outstanding. And they're all young. Most of them, most of the nucleus is young, and so they're going to be on an upward trajectory for years to come, and you have all those picks to blend in.
And the pick swaps, which I didn't mention.
And the pick swaps. So you can blend in young players periodically over that time, or you can package them down the road when you need to replace a C.J. McCollum in a few years, whatever it takes. So you have a lot of assets. Don't push it all into the middle of the table right now. See if you can use this pick to get some veteran leadership to help you next year. But be patient, that this is a long-term thing. They should be very good for a long time. Don't panic because you only won 42 this year when everybody was hurt.
I got 30 seconds. Discouraged or encouraged by what you saw this season?
I'm encouraged. They finished 42-40 despite the injuries, and there was a lot of individual improvement. We didn't even talk about Trey Murphy. Touch on Herb Jones. Jose Alvarado was really playing well before his injuries. I think you just got to get the health part right. They'll be good.
Right. Discouraged or encouraged?
No, I'm encouraged for the same reason. I think they're what we thought they would be when they're healthy. If they're healthy next year, I think we'll be having a different conversation because they'll be in the middle of the playoffs.
I couldn't think of 2 better individuals that cover the Pelicans they have on our program today. Great plethora of knowledge and, of course, tell it like it is. Oleh, Kosel, Les East, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks,
that was great. That was great. Sorry we didn't get to the draft. We got all next week's show to be able to get to the draft, but this was something that we definitely had to do. All right, so many ways to catch our program now. We are so blessed, again, with so many rebroadcasts. Here's an easy way to do it. Pick your favorite rebroadcast and set your DVR. You'll never miss this program. There's a QR code on your screen right now. And click that with your phone. It'll take you either to my website or WLAE-TV YouTube page. Catch me on the radio, 106.1 FM. That's 4 to 6 weekdays. You can listen live at ericasher.com, the Nash FM website, also the TuneIn Radio app, the iHeartRadio app, or our digital platforms. And, of course, our social media platforms have all of our programs, from this show to our radio show, that are on those platforms as well. I want to thank our underwriters who make this show possible, each and every one of them. Please support our underwriters. And also want to thank the production staff here at WLAE, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Lo Grafia, also Alex Chacon, and my director, William Hill. For Les East, for Oleh Kosel, I'm Eric Asher. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.